In a previous video, we began detailing some of the most important conflicts in the Galactic Civil War as seen through the lens of legends. In that first video, we mostly focused on the official formation of the Alliance to restore the Republic, its first few successes, and the role Galen Starkiller Marek and his clone played in those events. Where we left off in our last entry in this series, the rebels had just scored their first major victory on Kamino, during which they had taken Darth Vader captive with the intent to interrogate him. Naturally, Darth Vader eventually escapes the rebels, but unfortunately, there's no concrete answer as to how. Many of these early events were detailed in the Force Unleashed games and novels, but the matter of Vader's escape remained a mystery. That said, we see Boba Fett's ship, Slave One, following behind the rebel fleet as they leave Kamino victorious, so it would be a safe bet to assume that he had a hand in setting the Sith Lord free. Whatever the truth may be, moving forward through the rest of this series, Darth Vader is at large and in charge, much to the dismay of the Alliance. From their very beginning, the rebel leaders were made aware of the Death Star's existence and, to an extent, the reason of its existence. As a natural consequence, the Alliance dedicated a substantial amount of both effort and resources to try and prevent the Death Star from being completed, and when that failed, destroy it. In today's video, we'll be focusing on the Alliance's efforts to secure the Death Star's plans and what their eventual success led to later on in the Galactic Civil War.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Ever since that fateful day in 2 BBY, when Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Garm Bel Iblis were captured on Corellia and brought to the Death Star, the Alliance was aware that a giant battle station was under construction. However, at the time, the rebel leaders didn't have much information regarding the station's purpose or its design. Thus, soon after their rescue and the official formation of the Alliance to restore the Republic, the rebels launched Operation Skyhook, a long-term plan that spanned 2 years. Operation Skyhook was the codename given to a series of missions the Rebel Alliance undertook to first seize the Death Star's plans, then destroy the battle station. The Alliance first became aware of a massive Imperial construction project when they launched a mission to Kashyyyk to rescue rebels aboard the Ginyu. The Ginyu was an Imperial freighter set to travel from the prison known as Star's End to the Forest Planet, but before it set off, several escaped rebel pilots, among them Sam Raider and Tolagar, boarded the freighter. When the Imperials learnt the escaped rebels were on board the Ginyu, they sent other ships to board and search all vessels approaching Kashyyyk. But the Alliance also had learnt of the escaped rebels, and so they sent Captain Kian Farlander and Lieutenant Kardax in R-22 Spearheads to intercept. A Lambda-class shuttle went with them, but didn't exit hyperspace at the same time. The two pilots were able to destroy the Imperial boarding party, then board the Ginyu themselves and rescue the escapees. From these rebels, the Alliance learnt that the Empire was gathering Wookiee slaves from Kashyyyk and setting them to work on a secret construction project. Simultaneously, the astromech R2-D2 sliced into the Imperial computer networks and did some investigating of his own. What he found was mentions of an Imperial superweapon, though there were scant few details, much less enough to identify the weapon in question. Members of the Underground corroborated the existence of one, however. Following what they had learned from the escaped Star's End prisoners, the Alliance began rescuing Wookiee slaves while they were on board Toral, another Imperial slave transport freighter. Further investigation of the ship's documents revealed a weapons convoy near Oran 3, an agricultural world in the corporate sector of the Outer Rim. In response, the Alliance launched an assault on this convoy, which included the Tone, Uhuru, and Heiko. The rebel attack force included Y-Wings from Red and Gold Squadrons and X-Wings from Blue Squadron. Their firepower was more than enough to destroy the convoy of ships and seize several communication satellites from their base. Through those satellites, the mysterious superweapon schematics were transmitted to a rebel outpost, finally confirming the existence of the Death Star. As you can tell, information in the early days of the Alliance came from various sources. The Rebel Alliance was still in its infancy, relying on secret political connections and smaller strike teams to gather intel and connect the dots. At the same time, while the Death Star was certainly high up on their list of priorities, it wasn't the only one. Around this time, Princess Leia of Alderaan undertook a mercy mission to bring the Altiri High Council medical supplies and equipment. Of course, Leia was working for the Alliance, and the true purpose of this mission was to arm the local resistance fighters with heavy weaponry and military-grade equipment so they could continue fighting against their Imperial occupiers. As a diplomatic vessel, her ship, the Tantive 4, wasn't searched, which is how she was able to smuggle in the illegal weapons. The local commander, Commodore Tyon, was the Imperial official who permitted her descent. While on Raltiri, Leia was able to rescue a wounded rebel known as Basso. Basso later confirmed the Death Star was currently being built. Leia took this information to her adoptive father, Senator of Alderaan and secret rebel leader Bail Organa, and he confirmed the story. There was, indeed, a top-secret Imperial superweapon being spearheaded by Wilhuf Tarkin. When Commodore Tyon visited Alderaan, Leia managed to manipulate him into sharing more information about the Death Star. Among other things, Tyon revealed it was a moon-sized battle station equipped with a laser powerful enough to destroy entire planets. The Commodore also added that a convoy was transporting the plans for the battle station from Tarkin's headquarters to a secure Imperial vault. The situation turned dicey when Leia overplayed her hand, exposing herself as a rebel, but Tyon was dispatched before he could share the Organa's involvement with the Rebel Alliance with the Imperial Security Forces on Alderaan. Now, for those of you who watched our earlier video, this segment probably doesn't make a lot of sense. We just explained how the rebel leaders, among them Bail Organa, learnt about the Death Star by being lured into a trap on Corellia, where they were caught signing the treaty consolidating the Rebel Alliance. By all accounts, the Empire should have been well aware that Bail Organa was a rebel. Tyon discovering the Organa's involvement with the Alliance shouldn't have mattered. If anything, we find it hard to believe that Bail Organa was allowed to return to Alderaan as if nothing had happened. This incongruence is one of several inconsistencies the Force Unleashed causes with this period of Legends lore. There will be more, and we will point them out as they arise. That said, it doesn't affect the overall story too significantly. Think of it like a puzzle made up of pieces that don't quite fit together, even if the resulting image is the right one. But back to the story. With the additional information from Leia, Mon Mothma ordered further investigation into the nature of the weapon. With everything they had learned so far, they were able to pinpoint a shipment of cargo headed toward a research station that was managing part of the Death Star project. The research facility was located in the Vergesso asteroid's Lout in the Outer Rim. Captain Antilles had Han Solo smuggle a tracking device and EMP into one of the containers headed toward the facility. The tracking device led the rebels to Corellag. Now, Corellag was a populated terrestrial planet in the core and a former colony of Coruscant. It might seem strange to put a research facility handling top secret information above such a central and conspicuous world, but in truth, it was well chosen. Corellag was one of the first planets to join the Galactic Republic, and it had never looked back. During the Clone Wars, it had remained loyal, and even after the fall of the Empire, they were staunch Palpatine supporters. During the reign of the Galactic Empire, Corellag was praised for its model Imperial citizen behavior. The planet even had an Imperial military academy that received high praise. In short, it was extremely loyal to the Empire. Once the rebels had located the research facilities, they detonated the EMP charge Solo had planted in the cargo container. The resulting pulse paralyzed the security forces, allowing Captain Antilles to lead an assault on the station. Thanks to the raid, the Alliance was able to gather valuable information. Among other things, they learnt that the superweapon project was called the Death Star and that it was a planet-ending level threat. However, they were unable to find precise schematics for the battle station, and so Mon Mothma tasked Princess Leia with doing everything in her power to get a hold of those plans. Operation Skyhook's intelligence gathering phase was concluded with 2 missions that directly aimed to find and steal the Death Star schematics. The first was the mission to Danuta, where rebel spy Kyle Katarn was sent to a secret Imperial facility on Trid to retrieve the schematics. But how had the plans gotten to Trid in the first place? Enter Imperial Librarian Ator Ritten, a man as dry as papyrus and as sneaky as an Imperial agent. During his career as a librarian, Ritten had made a habit of cataloguing and storing away sensitive information about officials. Imperial officials were not particularly a fan of his growing stockpile of blackmail material, so in 0 BBY, he was assigned as Chief Librarian of the Death Star. Imperial officials figured out that being on board a top-secret battle station would be the best place to keep someone who hoarded secrets. A few months into his stint as the Chief Librarian, he transmitted a set of partial blueprints to Bevel Lemelisk on Danuta, whom you might remember as the Death Star Architect. One might wonder why the architect needed a set of his own blueprints, but let's not look too deeply at prime Imperial decision-making. What matters is that the plans were on Danuta, which is where the Alliance sent Kyle Katarn, former Imperial officer, current Rebel spy, and future Jedi badass. Unbeknownst to him, another Rebel operative, Jan Ors, preceded him to Danuta, where she spied on him with intent to kill him if he proved to be a double agent. Luckily for the rebellion, Katarn was on their side, and he performed his mission well. When the facility seemed impervious to infiltration, Katarn reached out to an old friend of his, Mek Odom, who was an Imperial officer at the facility. Katarn risked everything by confiding in his old friend, who then helped him break into the facility. With a combined effort between the three of them, the two rebel agents were able to leave Danuta with a complete set of plans detailing the layout of the Death Star. These plans were physically brought to Princess Leia. Additional data was provided by former prisoners on board the Death Star who had stolen the plans, escaped, and made their way to the rebel outpost of Polis Massa. Even more intelligence was provided by Gambel Iblis shortly before he was presumed dead. Finally, the last piece of the puzzle was brought to the table by rebels operating on Toprawa, a forested world in the Outer Rim near the Hydian Way. The rebels had set up an outpost planetside from where they transferred any Imperial data to the Alliance. During the development of the Death Star project, the Empire set up research facilities on Toprawa. The battle station's superlaser weapon was developed planetside, but other key data was also stored at the facility. This made it a prime target for the local rebels. Havet Storm, Commander Bria Tharan, and Rebel Cell Leader Vermilion launched an operation to infiltrate the facilities and steal as much information on the Death Star as they could. Although the latter two gave their lives in the line of duty, they were able to transmit the superlaser blueprints, the Death Star's complete hull design, and its life support infrastructure. In retaliation, the Empire punished the entire planet of Toprawa. Cities were leveled, and entire regions were left impoverished. A large majority of the population had to resort to begging the Empire for aid, and it received little help. The plans were meant to be transmitted to the Star Cruiser Liberty, but Imperial reinforcements led by Darth Vader entered the system and blocked the rebels in. Instead, the rebels transmitted the data to Princess Leia directly on board the Tantive 4 when she arrived in the system under the guise of another mercy mission. However, the data transfer was detected by Vader's flagship, the Devastator, forcing Tantive 4 to flee to the Tattoo system of the Outer Rim. What Leia and the rebels didn't know at the time was that their arrival on Tatooine would be the spark that ignited one of the most important battles of the early Galactic Civil War. When the Empire learnt the stolen Death Star plans were aboard Tantive 4, a diplomatic vessel belonging to the Princess of Alderaan, it hardly came as a surprise. Alderaan had been a thorn in the Empire's side for years, which is why the Empire had planned ahead. Unbeknownst to the rebels, there was an unwitting spy among their midst. A droid by the designation of U-3PO had been programmed to act as a sleeper agent and planted on board the vessel all the way back when Princess Leia had been on that fake humanitarian mission on Raltir. Thanks to U-3PO, Vader knew exactly where the princess had fled to and was in hot pursuit. What Vader wasn't expecting was the pirate ambush he landed in the moment he and his fleet exited hyperspace by Tatooine. The Imperial Navy was more than capable of taking the pirates on regardless, and once they destroyed most of the pirate vessels, their ships hid among the surrounding nebulae where they could hide from Blue Squadron's scouting patrols. The Imps lay in wait until Tantive 4 moved toward the uplink station, which is when Interdictor-class cruisers attacked, preventing it from escaping. This began a new naval battle between the Rebel Alliance and the Empire's fleets, while Tantive 4 fled the battle with the Devastator hot on its heels. During the chase, the Imperials managed to land a hit on the diplomatic vessel's rear engine section, disabling its main reactor and preventing it from escaping down into Tatooine's atmosphere. Unable to escape, Tantive 4 was powerless to prevent itself from being caught in a tractor beam while a boarding party prepared to board it. The rebels aboard Tantive 4 didn't take too kindly to the Imperial boarding party. The moment the first stormtrooper peeked their head in, they fought back fiercely. Both sides took heavy losses, but the 501st Legion eventually broke through their defenses, capturing the main rebel resistance team. When Vader boarded, he was already displeased at being so close to Tatooine, which he hated from his time there. The Sith destroyed all the security terminals on the bridge, then disabled a console, stealing the access codes to the ship's escape pod bay. With them in hand, he and some selected guards made their way through the ship toward the cockpit. As he went, Vader captured most of the soldiers, including the ship's captain, Ramus Antilles, who had been assigned to Tantive 4 as part of Operation Skyhook. Vader had also ordered 2 Imperial droids to scour the ship's computer terminals for the stolen plans, but when there was no trace of them, Vader took to interrogating Antilles at Force Chokepoint. Despite the invisible hand of injustice at his throat, the captain died before he admitted to having stolen the plans or where the princess was. While the fight had been happening, 2 droids, the protocol droid C-3PO and the astromech R2-D2, managed to evade the conflict. The astromech made his way to Princess Leia, who gave the plans to him and sent him toward the escape pods with a recorded message for Obi-Wan Kenobi calling for help. The 2 droids then headed for the escape pods. Meanwhile, Vader had sent the 501st Legion to gather all the passengers, including the ambassador, and bring them to him alive. As they were brought to him, he tortured them to recover any information on the Death Star or the whereabouts of the missing plans. When Leia was eventually found and captured, Vader officially arrested her under the charge of treason. With the threat of her capture and execution being used to further the rebel cause, Vader called for a distress signal to be sent to other rebel vessels engaging in the naval battle above Tatooine, letting them know Tantive 4 had hit a meteor storm, killing everyone on board. To cover up their capture of the vessel, the Devastator also made short work of any escape pods carrying rebels from the ship. But therein lay the Imperials' key mistake. They were scanning the escape pods for signs of life to detect rebels inside them, but when they got to the escape pods ferrying droids, they found no signs of life, and so they allowed it to reach Tatooine. Additionally, the Imperials had no reason to suspect there might be droids on board, as droids weren't allowed to use escape pods. R2-D2 was unusual for a droid in that he retained a significant amount of independent thought and decision-making, which only proves once more that droid lives matter. The empty pod was still reported to Vader, who concluded that Leia must have hidden the plans in it. He ordered his second-in-command, Commander Praji, to see to the matter on Tatooine. Earlier Imperial patrols had deduced there was no rebel activity on the planet itself. Unbeknownst to the Devastator, a distress signal had been sent to a rebel base on Collidor in the Collidor system of the Outer Rim. Soon after the passengers of Tantive 4 had been cleared, Commander Rue Merlin led a squad of X-Wings to Tatooine and opened fire on the Devastator, landing a critical hit with proton torpedoes before descending for the surface. However, they weren't in time to stop Imperial TIEs and starfighters from destroying their base near Anchorhead. They were, however, able to chase and destroy them before they could report the base's existence to their commanding officer. Meanwhile, Commander Praji had already left for Tatooine. Once planetside, Captain Kosh and his local garrison were assigned to the commander alongside Commander Jiz's 501st. As a coincidence, this is also when the Star Destroyer Inquisitor arrived, carrying Captain Terek and his Desert Sands. This was a unit of Imperial Desert Stormtroopers who had arrived first for some training in the desert, then to relieve the local 37th Detachment. With so many Imperial units on the planet, tasks were quickly allocated. The Sandtroopers were sent out into the desert to look for the escape pod, which they did with the assistance of a few dewbacks, one HAV-R A9 floating fortress, and 2 Arran-skin cargo skiffs they'd borrowed from the 37th. The sand troopers combed the deserts for hours, constructing command stations as they went. Unfortunately for them, the locals didn't take well to their intrusion. The local Tusken raiders attacked, followed closely by a band of rebel fighters, supported by speeders and a few X-Wings. A 3-way battle broke out, during which the rebels were completely wiped out. It didn't take much longer for the escape pod to be located in the Dune Sea. When it had landed and the droids had made their escape, some metal had fallen off R2-D2's hull, which informed the Imperials that the pod's occupants had been droids. They followed their tracks until they came to a Jawa sandcrawler, which they intercepted. Upon finding that the droids had been sold off to moisture farmers, the Imperial soldiers killed every last Jawa, destroying the sandcrawler, and left gaffi sticks nearby to implicate the Tusken Raiders if anyone were to stumble across the scene. By the time the Imperials found the people that had purchased the droids, it was too late. Owen and Beru Lars, the owners of the moisture farm, refused to surrender the droids, but Captain Terek realized their defiance was irrelevant. The droids had been taken away from the homestead. Thinking ahead to prevent any rebels from leaving the planet with the information, he ordered for checkpoints to be set up at the entrances to Mos Eisley and Mos Espa before he himself left for Mos Eisley, the only spaceport locals were able to leave Tatooine from. Of course, we all know that C-3PO and R2-D2 were with Luke Skywalker and his newfound friend and mentor, Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. The message Princess Leia had recorded for the Jedi Master in hiding was calling for his aid in getting the stolen plans to her father on Alderaan. However, Kenobi had no transportation, and so he and his protege had travelled to Mos Eisley, a spaceport town infamous for gathering every flavour of scum and villainy in the galaxy. The small group was able to sneak into the city despite the various checkpoints. R2-D2 was a target of the highest priority, which had led to the city crawling with sandtroopers. Luckily for Kenobi and Skywalker, a few local rebels started a guerrilla war with the Imperial troopers, dipping in and out of the narrow alleys of Mos Eisley, firing on the Imperials and keeping them busy. In the Mos Eisley cantina, Skywalker and Kenobi met the smuggler Han Solo and his co-pilot, the Wookiee Chewbacca, who agreed to smuggle them to Alderaan. However, a fight broke out in their cantina, which Kenobi responded to by drawing his lightsaber and revealing himself as a Jedi. This, of course, caught the attention of the Imperials, who pursued the group to Docking Bay 94, where the Millennium Falcon, Solo's ship, was docked. A firefight broke out in the hangar, during which an Imperial trooper exposed himself as a rebel by shooting his own commanding officer. Thanks to his actions, the Falcon was able to take off, coasting through the Dune Sea to avoid detection by the Star Destroyers in orbit. Once more, the Empire took its frustration out on the locals. With their quarry gone, the Imperial troopers launched a pacification campaign in Mos Eisley, where they attempted to subdue the locals who had teamed up with the rebels to wage war against them. Despite their guerrilla tactics, this minor rebellion was quashed quickly. The campaign almost made its way to Anchorhead, but a rebel base by the name of Ketol was able to deter them. The rebels from Kolador we mentioned earlier soon joined in on the action. When the Empire was deploying its ground troops throughout Mos Eisley, the Koladorians swooped in to damage their supply lines as much as possible before being forced away by incoming TIE reinforcements. Despite the minor rebel victories, the Empire was ultimately victorious in Mos Eisley, thoroughly squashing the minor uprising. That said, although they had won the Battle of Tatooine, which was less a single battle and more a series of smaller skirmishes put together, the Empire had failed in its ultimate objective, recovering the stolen Death Star plans. The Millennium Falcon had escaped, albeit with a tracking beacon secured to it without their knowledge. In Vader's resulting anger, the Death Star was deployed for the first time, destroying Princess Leia's homeworld of Alderaan before her very eyes. Later, Luke Skywalker and his team would rescue her from the Death Star, succeeding primarily thanks to Kenobi's sacrifice. With the Princess and the Death Star plans in hand, Skywalker, Solo, the Princess, Chewbacca, and the droids made their way to the rebel base on Yavin 4. 2 years of effort and the sacrifice of hundreds of rebels had culminated in that moment. Finally, the Rebel Alliance had the full set of plans to the Empire's now fully operational superweapon. The arrival of the Millennium Falcon on Yavin 4 was the spark that ignited a flurry of activity and preparation for the Rebels. With the Death Star now fully operational, the Rebels knew they were operating on borrowed time. They knew the Empire would retaliate swiftly for the theft of their plans, and so they rushed to prepare the secret Rebel base for the attack they knew was coming. As a close second priority, they scoured the stolen Death Star schematics to pinpoint any potential weak spot it might have. In preparation for the attack, the Star Cruiser Independence, under the command of Admiral Akbar, brought members of the Alliance High Command to the Forest Moon. When the Independence arrived in the system, it deployed members of Red, Gold, and Blue Squadron, whose numbers were further supplemented by other veteran Alliance pilots. But the Rebels had precious little time to prepare. Thanks to the tracking beacon they had placed on the Millennium Falcon on Tatooine, the Imperials now knew of the location of the Rebels' secret base and were en route mere hours after the Rebels had received the full Death Star schematics. This led to serious issues in planning their counteroffensive. The Alliance lacked the capital ships and needed to attack the Death Star directly and fire on the focusing crystals. With such little time to prepare, they were also unable to plan an infiltration mission into the Death Star so they could sabotage it from within. As the Rebels pored over the schematics, an Imperial recon team arrived on the planet and engaged with the Rebels at the Massassi Arena. The Alliance was running out of time. But then, there was a glimmer of hope. While studying the Death Star schematics Leia had brought with the Millennium Falcon, the Alliance realized the battle station did have one single exploitable weak point, a small exhaust port not protected by its thorough shielding. If they succeeded in feeding a proton torpedo through that port, it would travel through to the main reactor and with one shot cause the entire station to detonate. However, the weakness was not easy to exploit. The port was barely 2 meters wide, located in a narrow trench protected by turbo laser turrets. Anyone hoping to fire that proton torpedo would have to fly through that narrow trench, dodging turbo laser fire while their guidance system locked onto the small target. 2 meters might sound large as a target, but in the greatest scheme of space combat, it's incredibly small, especially when you consider the speeds starfighters reach while in space. Under the circumstances, it was nigh impossible for the mission to succeed, but the Rebels had little other choice. Thus, with the weight of the impossible on their shoulders, Red and Gold squadrons took it upon themselves to target the port, while Blue and Green squadrons attacked the super laser itself to buy them time. There was a faint hope that, even if Red and Gold squadrons failed, the damage the two other inflicted on the super laser might render it incapable of firing. But with those bare bones plans in place, the Rebels had run out of time. Only a scant few hours after the Battle of Tatooine, the Empire struck back. Doom loomed over the Yavin 4 Alliance base as the Death Star arrived in the system, large enough to fill the sky of the Forest Moon. Accompanying the Death Star was a small support force made up of the Nebulan B frigate Divard, 2 CR-90 corvettes, 2 Victory II class Star Destroyers, and 2 Titan class patrol cruisers. While the Death Star's super laser began charging an attack, the Imperials deployed a communications satellite to coordinate their attack. Still in the midst of their preparations, the Rebels knew they had to buy more time. Any delay to the Death Star charging its weapon could mean the difference between life and death for everyone on Yavin 4, and by extension, the Rebellion. With that in mind, the Alliance launched a small attack force to destroy the communications satellite, stalling for a time. Captain Kian Farlander, whom you might remember as the man in charge of capturing the Ginyu, set out with 2 other X-Wings and a pair of R-22 spearheads. While his wingmen held off the Imperial fighters, Farlander went straight for the satellite, which he successfully destroyed with a proton torpedo. His success meant the Empire was unable to call for reinforcements and would struggle to organize their defense. The 2 other X-Wings were destroyed during the assault, however, and their pilots had to be rescued later. With that, the Alliance had bought enough time to put together a full assault force. A majority of the ships gathered at the base, including MC-80 Star Cruisers, Nebulan B frigates, and a flurry of starfighters, took on the Imperial Star Destroyers and patrol cruisers, destroying them in order to open the way for the squadrons to attack the Death Star directly. Farlander and another pilot preceded the squadrons, tasked with destroying some of the turbolaser turrets running alongside the length of the trench. Alongside the defense turrets, the two rebel pilots were also able to destroy some small hangar bays, limiting the number of starfighters that could join the battle on the Imp's side. But the Battle of Yavin wasn't limited to a naval theatre. On the ground, groups of rebel soldiers fought off an Imperial atmospheric assault in the form of TIE/SA bombers executing bombing runs on the base, while an Imperial stormtrooper contingent made planetfall and assailed the base on foot. To avoid the bombers, whose aerial assault was unencumbered when the stormtroopers disabled an anti-aircraft turret, the rebels took shelter in the nearby temple. It was up to the rebel ground soldiers to first reactivate the anti-aircraft turret, then defend the Great Temple against the stormtroopers. They were also instrumental in preventing disaster in space by destroying the jamming devices the Imperials had set up to disrupt the X-Wings' engines. Following Farlander's run, a starfighter force assaulted the battle station. 22 X-Wings, 8 Y-Wings, and 2 R-22 Spearhead starfighters approached the Death Star, which tried to repel them using its laser batteries. However, its defenses were designed to fend off much larger capital ships, such as Star Destroyers, so the small and agile starfighter craft were able to weave through its volleys, destroying several turrets and one giant iron cannon. But even this starfighter run was only a prelude to the main assault. In response to the rebel attack, the Imperials had mixed reactions. Grand Moff Wilf Tarkin, on one hand, was indifferent to the rebel threat and refused to deploy the station's TIE fighters. In the Grand Moff's mind, any attempts the rebels made were doomed, and all he had to do was wait for the Death Star's super laser to charge, then wipe them off the face of the galaxy. He even refused to listen to Moradmin Bast, his chief in command, who feared the rebels might have discovered a weakness and suggested an evacuation. Darth Vader, on the other hand, was able to realize the rebels posed a real threat and deployed his personal fighter squadron. The TIE fighter squad attacked the rebels around the time the rebel starfighters were taking down their laser batteries. With the TIEs now swarming around the battle station, the Imperials ordered the turbolasers to shut down to avoid accidentally shooting down friendly craft, while the TIEs took on the rebel starfighters. 3 Y-Wings from Gold Squadron, Gold Leader, Gold 1, and Gold 2 were the first to make an attempt on the trench, but Darth Vader was close on their tails in his personal TIE fighter, with 2 more veteran Imperial pilots as his wingmen. Vader shot down all 3 Gold Squadron starfighters inside the trench, then took out Gold 5 as he tried to escape. With Gold Squadron having failed, the Alliance Command ordered Red Squadron to split their forces, keeping half the starfighters out of range. Red Leader obeyed the command and had Red 2, Red 3, and Red 5, which was piloted by Luke Skywalker, remain back, while he personally led the other half of the squadron into the trench. Once again, Vader destroyed 2 of the 3 starfighters, shooting down Red 10 and Red 12 as they followed Red Leader into the trench. Red Leader managed to complete his trench run, but when he neared the end and locked onto the exhaust port, his proton torpedo exploded on its surface. As he veered off to return, he met the same fate as his 2 squadmates. On board the Death Star, Imperial tacticians were analyzing the rebels' tactics, which is when they discovered there was a not insignificant chance they could destroy the main reactor, and with it, the entire battle station. Once again, Tarkin was advised to either evacuate or retreat, but once again, he refused, overconfident that victory would be his. After Red Leader's destruction, the remainder of Red Squadron moved in to make their own attempt on the exhaust port, with Luke Skywalker's Red 5 in the lead and Red 2 and 3 behind him, trying to shield him from any TIEs. All 3 starfighters made the run at full speed, relying on it to keep the TIEs at bay. However, disaster seemingly struck when, on his approach, Skywalker's stabilizer loosened, which forced him to attempt repairs. This slowed him down, as he couldn't lock on to the target without the stabilizer. But Red Squadron was running out of time. Seeing them inside the trench and knowing the danger they posed, Vader and his 2 wingmen opened fire from a distance while they closed on him. Red 2 took a hit that forced him to abandon the run. As the TIEs approached, Red 3 swerved into a weaving maneuver, trying to block the Imperial pilot's view of Skywalker while evading their fire himself. This worked on the two mundane fighter pilots, but Vader took the shot easily with the help of the Force, shooting Red 3 down and leaving only Skywalker to make or break the shot. The Imperial trio were right on his tail. As he was preparing to take the shot, Skywalker heard a voice. It was Obi-Wan Kenobi reaching out to him through the Force to guide him. Heeding his mentor's words, Skywalker deactivated his targeting computer entirely, which the rebels down on Yavin 4 found very questionable, but he persisted. As he prepared to fire, his starfighter took what could have been a critical hit, but it luckily only disabled his astromech temporarily. Aboard the Death Star, Tarkin ordered the use of the super laser on the rebel base the second the super weapon had fully charged. Skywalker had to act. Vader prepared to fire the killing blow, but Han Solo and Chewbacca swooped in at the last moment, taking out one of his wingmen and sending the other crashing into Vader's TIE. Clear of enemy fire, Skywalker took a deep breath and trusted in the Force as Obi-Wan instructed him. Against all odds, both of his torpedoes shot perfectly down the exhaust port in a move that would later be called 1 in a million, but was in all likelihood far more improbable than that. But in the few moments the Imperials had left, the super laser had finished charging. In the control room, Master Chief Gunnery Officer Ten Granite prepared to fire on Yavin 4, but he didn't. In those few moments, the Imperial officer had an attack of conscience. The weight of all the lives lost on Alderaan came pressing down on him, and despite all his colleagues screaming at him to fire the superweapon, he didn't. Seconds later, the torpedoes struck the main reactor and the Death Star exploded, taking Granite and every other Imperial on board with it. Although Vader managed to escape, the planet-killing superweapon that had loomed over the Alliance for 2 years and claimed the lives of an entire planet was no more. The Alliance hadn't won, they had triumphed. Of all the battles that took place during the Galactic Civil War, there's no doubt that the Battle of Yavin was the most important of all. The Battle of Endor might have been what ended the conflict, but if the Rebel Alliance hadn't triumphed on Yavin, it's likely the rebellion wouldn't have survived until then. The Alliance's victory on Yavin 4 had many far-reaching direct consequences. The Alliance gained immediate recognition throughout the galaxy as a serious threat to the Empire's tyrannical rule. Simultaneously, thanks to the destruction of the Death Star, the people of the galaxy were less afraid. Not only had the Empire lost a major superweapon, calling their power into question, but the simple destruction of the weapon loosened the hold the Empire had across the many systems it was ruling. Although Tarkin was, in many ways, a terrible person, he had been right. Fear was the most effective way for the Empire to control its citizens, and with it diminished, the citizens of the galaxy joined the Alliance in open revolt. Thousands of star systems joined the Alliance. In response, the Empire escalated things further, brutally occupying worlds it had mostly left alone up until that point. All across the galaxy, the Civil War intensified, with conflicts breaking out more frequently and with more violence. Vader also became obsessed with finding the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. On his orders, most likely, the Empire launched multiple raids against the Yavin 4 rebel base. For the most part, these raids seemed to be scouting passes rather than active attacks. The rebels, however, soon grew wary of the constant harassment and decided to relocate. But before they could do so, however, the Imperials had the chance for one final raid. Unlike the ones that had come before, this was a heavy assault strike, during which General Jan Dodona, the mastermind behind the rebels' victory in the Battle of Yavin, was unable to escape and was taken into Imperial custody. The Empire attempted to prevent the rebels from escaping, but poor planning caused a serious accident among friendly ships, and the last of the Alliance fleet was able to escape the system and vanish into the Outer Rim. Thus, a few months after the Battle of Yavin, the Alliance abandoned their base on the Forest Moon in favor of the frozen hellscape of Hoth. Here, they would find some brief respite, but it was only a matter of time before the Empires found them and brought the fight to the rebels' doorstep once more. A less fortunate consequence for the Rebel Alliance was the Empire's decision to increase mass production of the TIE/Iron Interceptor line, a variant of the TIE fighter that was superior to the standard model in almost every aspect. This resulted in Alliance pilots having a more difficult time in future battles. With more Executor-class star dreadnoughts on the production line and thousands of new soldiers advancing through the military courses at the Imperial Academy, the Empire really ramped up their war effort. In short, as a result of the Battle of Yavin, the Civil War got uglier. The Battle of Yavin represented the moment the Rebel Alliance went from a minor nuisance to the Galactic Empire to a major threat. Civil war and revolution spread across thousands of star systems, and in retaliation, the Empire's fist came down harder and bloodier than ever before. In recognition of the fact that this was the true turning point in the war, 25 years later, the New Republic Historical Council decided to use the Battle of Yavin as a reference point for a new calendar. Initially, after the Battle of Endor, the new calendar had set Year Zero as the year Emperor Palpatine was defeated, but the Historical Council devised a new system that used the Battle of Yavin as the point of reference moving forward. Thus, the new calendar was born, and all events in galactic history were thence referred to as BBY or ABY, or before the Battle of Yavin or after the Battle of Yavin. Even though the tides had begun to turn in the Alliance's favour, the war was far from won. Following the Battle of Yavin, there would be several bloody battles as the war escalated. Thousands of rebel soldiers would die and thousands more worlds would suffer as the Empire tightened its iron fist on the galaxy. Join us in our next video in this series where we'll get into the war's endgame. As always, feel free to leave any thoughts in the comments section below and let us know which moment gave you the most goosebumps. As always, feel free to leave any thoughts in the comments section below and let us know which moment gave you the most goosebumps. Hope to see you guys in the next installment of this series.